Hey everyone, Leanne here from Art with Heart Studio. I'm here to take you through a super cool tutorial for your June art box, and I'm really excited to do this project with you. It's one of my favorites that I've done so far. I really like doing mixed media pieces and I love working with watercolor tissue paper. I hope that you will too. If you've never worked with it before, you're in for a treat. So the piece that we're going to be doing together is this one here. So it's very fun and kind of whimsical. It's very interesting. I think it looks pretty nice to the eyes. So I'm going to take you through this kind of example to work on something that's sort of like this, but as we go through, you have complete creative freedom. So I want to make sure that you're doing your own thing. Okay, you do not have to follow me exactly. If you feel inspired to do something different, go for it. Art is all about freedom of expression, and I want you to enjoy it, because if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. Okay, so as we go along, I'll also offer some tips and tricks for those of you who want to challenge yourself a little bit more. If you're a little bit older, it's a good way to make a piece a little bit more complicated. If you're younger, it's okay, follow along. You'll work up to being able to do the complicated things later on. So I'm gonna show you what materials you need for this. You need a canvas. You're going to need your baggie of watercolor tissues. You have a bit more colors than I do here. I'm stuck with the leftover boring ones. You've got a whole rainbow assortment. This is not like regular tissue paper. This is different. So if you try to use regular tissue paper for this project, won't work. You need special art tissue paper called bleeding tissue paper or Spectra tissue. You're also going to need a pair of scissors and a paintbrush, your glue, a water dish. A paper towel is always a great idea. Will help you clean everything up and stay nice and tidy. It's also good because we're going to be using a lot of water, so you want to be able to dab your brush off after. And you're going to need a marker. You can also use a pencil if you prefer a pencil. This is just so that we can create our design. Mine was a swirl, but you can use a pencil if you don't want to see those lines underneath. I kind of like how bold they look with the marker, but it's up to you. So as we go through, I'm gonna go a little bit faster because I've done this a lot. If you need to slow down, pause the video, it's totally fine. Take as much time as you need. This is your art. If it takes you a lot longer, that's totally fine. I just want you to enjoy it. So pause if you need to, if you feel like you're falling behind. I'll be here when you come back and you're ready to start again. Okay? So that's it. I hope that you are ready to get started. I'm going to turn the camera around so that you can see my workstation and we'll follow along together. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to start by using reds and blues just because I like those colors. And I'm going to go with a bit of a pattern for mine. You don't have to do that. You can choose whatever style you want. And you could do the whole page colorful if you want to, or you could do kind of a pattern. It's all up to you. So when we cut these out after, we're going to cut them into triangles. And so the way I'm going to layer mine is I am going to create sort of strips of color. And you want to wet the page first, and then stick the tissue down. And you want to take your time with this. I've done this a lot, so I get pretty quick at it. And then after you've put them down on the page, you're going to go back over them with water, and you're going to make sure that you cover them pretty well. You don't want so much water that your page is really, really wet. You don't want to see the water pooling and dripping all over the place, but you want enough water that you're going to make sure that you coat that whole piece of tissue paper. Because if you don't, you will end up with little white lines underneath it, which still looks cool, so you don't have to worry too much about that. I just like the way it looks when it's full of color, especially since when we are finished with this, we're going to be gluing it onto a white background. So I want to make sure that I have as much color as possible on mine so that it looks super awesome against the white background. And so you'll just go, and you'll see as soon as you start putting them on and you add the water, you can see that it gives a watercolor effect. You can see all the color coming off of it. This is why it's called bleeding tissue paper, because the color sort of bleeds out off the tissue paper. And this tissue paper is special. You won't find this tissue paper just like at the dollar store. If you look at the regular kind of gift wrap tissue paper, it's not the same. You're not going to get the same kind of effect with the colors because this is a special kind of tissue paper. And I love working with this stuff. I think it's really cool. You can get some really interesting effects. As you will see with this mixed media box that you're doing, if this is the first activity that you're doing, then this is your intro to the watercolor tissue. If not, then you'll have already watched the video with Nikki, and I hope you came up with some really cool art. I'd love to see some pictures. If we get your parents to send us some pictures on Facebook, that would be fantastic. We really miss seeing everybody in person. We don't get to see all your cool creations as often anymore. So we're really missing you guys. Nope, see that one got a little bit messed up. So I'm just gonna put that one aside and try for a new color. And these tissues, once they're wet, that's it, they're done. So you can't reuse them. So you wanna make sure that you're keeping them away from your water, because I will say, I have accidentally spilled water right on top of them before, and then you can no longer use them. And that's no fun. So now I've got a strip of the reds and the pinks, and I'm gonna move on and I'm gonna do some blues. And like I said, feel free to take your time with this. You can get super creative. I've done a lot of these, so I kind of speed through them a little bit. I find this part to be really relaxing. And the cool thing about doing these watercolor tissue paper projects is that your artwork never looks the same, because you will never be able to make it exactly the same using these tissues. Because depending on how much water you put on or where you place them, you're going to end up with a different effect underneath every time. And I think that projects like this are really cool because it creates a little bit of uniqueness. And you can do them over and over and over again and always end up with something a little bit different each time. Definitely can't have boring art that way. And so our goal is to fill the whole page. You want to make sure that you're covering as much as you possibly can. I don't like to leave any white parts of the page at all. So you'll see that in between I'm overlapping the colors. And these are going to go the same way as what regular colors will. So regular watercolors, if you mix two colors, you're going to get a different color. So I'm putting blues over top of the reds and the pinks. I'm going to end up with a purple color on this line here. So you have to be very careful when you're using these, because if you do too many colors all in one spot, you will end up with brown. So unless you want brown, I say try to stick to colors that mix well together. You have a whole different selection of colors in your little baggie. I don't have too many to pick from. You guys got all the cool colors. So now I'm gonna move on to over here. I think I'm gonna do actually a little bit more blue, do a little bit wider. And our goal at the end is to cut all these out to make some triangles to create our mixed media piece. So this is just a background, so you don't have to get super fancy with it, because it will be cut up. Sometimes I know that can be a little bit disappointing because you'll fall in love with the way it looks, but it's all for a good cause, because this is going to look really cool in the end. I'm just going to keep going along with this. And like I said, take your time. If you need to pause the video because you feel like you're falling behind, that's totally fine. Take a moment, do what you have to do to catch up. I've got this extra one here, I'm going to pop it on there. Again, because you can layer them, feel free to. You just want to make sure that you're not layering so many, like I said, that your paper gets way too saturated. Because if you have too much water, what'll happen is when you go to tear off the tissues after, you'll actually peel your paper behind because it'll be too wet, or you risk tearing it. And you don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our paper is intact, or it'll be much harder to cut after. So now I'm switching back to some of the reds and the pinks now, just to finish off my last little bit here. And then once it's totally done, because I'm getting pretty close to the end now, when it's totally done, we're gonna just let it sit for a few minutes, because we wanna make sure that all that color really soaks into the paper underneath. So we'll let it sit for, I usually let it sit, after I put my last piece on, I usually let it sit for between 2 and 5 minutes. And if you've put too much water on your paper, it will take a while to dry off before we can do the next step. So we'll have to have a little pause after anyhow. I'm going to overlap this one here. You can see all that red coming off my brush because now I've been putting the water over top of the reds and the pinks. And I recommend if you're using yellows, you definitely want to give your brush a really good wash. So you're going to really dip it around in there and make sure that when you dab it off on your paper towel that it comes clear, and then go back in and add a little bit more water. Because if you're trying to use yellow and you have red on your brush or blue on your brush or any other color on your brush, then you're not going to get your nice yellow color. It'll mix, and because yellow is so light, the other colors do tend to take over. So if you want a nice bright bold yellow, then make sure you have a very clean brush. That's a pretty good rule using any kind of paint, because yellow likes to take on all of the other colors. Same with white. You really want to make sure that your brush is nice and clean if you're using those style of colors. Okay, so now I'm going to throw my last one on here, do a little bit of an overlap. I'm going to fill in this little gap. Okay, and I think I'm happy with that so far. So I'm going to give my brush a clean, dry it off. And you'll see, you can look on here, you can see some of this bleeding effect happening. So I have light colors underneath, so you can see the blue is kind of bleeding out a little bit and creating this really cool effect. I've got some happening in here, so I'm hoping this is going to be a nice purple color underneath. Same with down here, I've got some transition happening, a little bit over here. So I like to see how it looks while all the tissues are on, and then go from there and see what happens after. So we're going to let it sit for about 2 minutes. I'm going to skip ahead, so when I come back to you, then it will be dry and ready to go. So just sit, wait, and I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, and we're back. So it's been about 2 minutes now, and we are going to start peeling off our tissue papers. So this is the part where it gets a little bit messy. It's going to stain your fingers a little bit. Don't worry, it'll come off after a few washes. It's not that big of a deal. So what we're going to do is, I like to start where I put my first piece of tissue down, and you're going to very gently just peel them off. You want to be very careful at this step, because if you dig too far into the paper, you might tear the paper underneath, because it is still going to be wet. So you see, I'm very gentle fingers to peel it off, and then you'll want to put all these in the garbage after. So we're going to peel them. Sometimes it's really cool because you can grab them and you'll peel them in such a way that you get a whole bunch of them like that, all in one go, all comes off. Sometimes you have to go back because you think you peeled them all off and you didn't. So you just want to make sure you double check. What'll happen too as it dries, sometimes there's some that you missed and you don't know until it's totally dry and they start to peel off the paper as they're drying. We're going to peel them all off, and you can see it leaves behind this really cool watercolor effect. All done with little tissues. See, I think that looks really cool where it all bled out from the darker one. You get all kinds of different effects with this. And like I said, if you didn't put enough water on, you will end up with some little white lines underneath, and that's okay. It looks really cool, especially if you're using it for a background, to have some of the streaks, because you can also make those streaks on purpose. If you crinkle up the paper and put it on, you'll end up with some white lines underneath. And again, I'm being very careful to take these off because I really don't want to tear that paper underneath. If you have sharp nails, you have to be extra cautious. We're going to go through and get them all off here and see what we've come up with. So I'm going to keep pulling. Ooh, I like when they all come off in a clump. Ooh, I'm really liking this purple color that happened over here. It's really nice. I think I've almost got them all. I think I just have these last couple. And then I'm gonna just give a double check. I don't want to put my fingers on it too much while it's still wet because I risk smearing the colors all over or leaving, if my fingers are dirty at all, leaving fingerprints. So I made it through a little bit unscathed. I've only got a few little bits on the ends of my fingertips that'll be colorful for a little while. Okay, so there we go. So now, the boring part. Now we have to make sure that this is totally dry. So at this point, you're gonna wanna pause the video and come back to this after. We're gonna have to let it set until it's completely dry. So this, depending on how much water you used, this could take 10 minutes or it could take an hour. Could take 2 hours if it's really wet, but you want to make sure that it's totally dry. If you want to speed along the process a little bit, you can see if one of your parents will let you use their hair dryer. But again, you want to be very careful with that because you don't want to crinkle the paper or burn the paper, definitely not. But if you just on a low setting, use the hair dryer on it, you can dry it up a little bit quicker. So I'm going to pause here and then we'll put it aside. I have another one ready to go so that we can continue on with the video, but you'll have to wait a little bit and be patient. Okay, see you when you're all dry. Okay, so welcome back everybody. I hope your pieces are nice and dry. I know mine is. So when I touch it, it's not damp at all. That's important because if it's still damp, it's going to tear when you cut it. And we don't want that. We want nice, crisp, clean cuts through this paper. So mine's nice and dry. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna cut the little triangles to glue onto our canvas here. So if you want it to be a little bit more challenging, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna cut some smaller triangles. And you can fill your whole canvas with small triangles, or you can do bigger ones. So if you look at this one here, I have a mixture of both. So I have some really teeny tiny ones in here. Those ones I cut at the very end to add because I decided I wanted to have a little bit more inside this little circle-y part here. I also have some medium-sized ones, and then I have some big triangles that I cut. So it's entirely up to you. You can cut them as big or as small as you want. Like I said, the smaller they are, the more complicated it's going to be to glue down. You want to make sure you have a lot of triangles as well. Okay, so the way I'm going to start is I'm going to cut my paper into strips first. So I think that some of my bigger triangles are going to be reds. So I'm going to just cut along here. If you just did a multicolor page, then you just cut whatever strips you want. So I'm going to cut a few that are about the same size here. Okay. And I think I'm actually going to do maybe a couple that are really big. And then I'm going to do some pretty small ones. So I'm just cutting all these strips. If you're a little bit younger, it's a good idea to do larger triangles. And if you're a little bit older, try to focus on doing some smaller triangles. Okay, so now I have a pretty good variety, I think, of different sizes. I think actually I'm gonna go even smaller. I'm gonna make this one really small triangles. Okay, so you can see now I've got an assortment of different sizes. Now we actually have to cut our triangles. So the way I do it, I like to keep them kind of organized so that way if I'm looking for a specific size, I can access it easily. So I'm gonna start with my biggest ones, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut some triangles, right? So I'm gonna cut that. This is gonna be just a little scrap piece, which I'll keep all of these because if I decide I want some little teeny tiny triangles, I'll use the scrap pieces to do that. So I'll just put that off to the side. And then I'm just gonna cut triangles, right? Like this, back and forth, back and forth. And this can be a time-consuming step, and that's okay. Again, just take your time with it. If you need a little bit of help because you get tired of cutting, just ask your parents. I'm sure they'll help you cut some triangles out if you need it. So we're gonna go through, cut, cut, cut. Again, if I go too quickly for you, just pause the video and then play it when you're ready to catch up again. I've got another little scrap piece I'm gonna put with my scraps. Okay, so these are my bigger triangles. So I'm gonna just sort of set those off to the side there. Now I'm gonna go to my medium-sized triangles, and these happen to be my pink ones, my pinks and my reds. So again, that's my little scrap piece. And I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna cut the triangles. Now you can do really skinny ones if you want, so I'm cutting them a little bit wider at the base, But if you want, you can do some really skinny ones. So see if I change the length of the base, I can get some really small ones. So you can see the difference in them right there. Okay, so again, it's all up to you. You can just do this if you want and have a whole variety of shapes and sizes for your triangles. It's all going to look really cool in the end anyway, so whatever you decide to do. Keep going. And you're going to want lots of triangles for this. So it might seem like I'm cutting way too many, but it takes a lot more than you think to go around depending on the design that you have. And we'll get into the designs after this. So now I've got another pile. Moving on to my next one. Cut the little scrap off. Here we go. Lots of triangles. Okay, got some more. So I'm actually going to leave this piece until the end because I have quite a few here. So I'm going to leave this piece to the end just because if I leave it, I can decide if I need a certain size, I can cut it out of this. So say I wanted some that had a little bit of a wider base but were the same height. If I keep this one, then I'll be able to do that after. So I'm going to just set that one aside. And now I'm going to focus on doing some of the smaller ones here. I like this one. It's got the different colors in there. I hope you all came up with some cool patterns after you peeled off your tissue paper. Make for an interesting look as we place all of our triangles on our canvas. I think that this is probably the hardest part of this whole activity, is having the patience to go through and cut all of these triangles. Okay, so I'm going to have another little pile there. And now on to this one, and I'm almost done. I've only got 2 more strips to cut, so that's good. I think it'll all be worth it in the end because these are going to turn out so awesome. Okay, I'm also going to leave this piece here, and I'm going to put that with that other one just in case I need a different size. Okay. And now I'm going to go with my smallest ones. So these are my smallest little pieces that I have here that are going to create my tiny triangles. So I didn't actually do too many tiny triangles in this one, but I think I'm going to switch it up a little bit for this second piece I do. I never like to try and make it look the same, exactly the same twice. I like to try and do my art differently every time, so that way no matter how many times I do the same kind of project, it's different and exciting. The world would be pretty boring if we did everything the same all the time. I don't know about all of you, but I am pretty ready to be done with this cutting. like I said, this is probably the most time-consuming part. Definitely the most tedious. Okay, I got all of those little tiny triangles. And I'm going to do this last one as well. And we're almost through it. After this comes the fun part of putting everything together. And if this is your first tutorial that you're doing and you haven't done the tutorials with Nikki yet, if you have leftover triangles, I'll tell you right now that there's a possibility that you might want to use them in your mixed media tutorial with her. So if you find at the end of this that you have leftover pieces, don't throw them out. Just keep them with your June art kit, and then maybe you'll be able to use them in the other videos. It's always good to keep stuff like this because you never know when you'll have a use for it. I'll tell you, I have all kinds of little remnants from art projects at my house hanging around. Okay, so there we are. So that looks like a lot of triangles, but it's actually not that many. You'll see as we go that you use them up pretty quickly. Okay, so now that we have all of our triangles cut, we need to decide what kind of design we're going to do on our canvas. So you can do it a couple of different ways. You can go like a spiral like I did, or maybe you want to do a bunch of circles, maybe you want to do waves. You can do all kinds of different things. But just remember, the more lines you have, the more intricate it's going to be, and the more complicated. So these ones you can see on here that I sort of went about an inch between on the lines, right? You want to make sure you leave some of that space because seeing the white canvas is what's going to help make your colors pop. If you don't leave enough white space, all your colors are going to blend together and you'll have a hard time seeing your design. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind as you're doing this. So you could do a spiral like that one, or maybe you want to do it kind of like a target. You could kind of go like this on your canvas, make a target, right? But again, make sure that you're leaving a little bit of space between because you want to see that white space. If you want to get super complicated, you could try and do a scene. You could do maybe have it go kind of like this. Maybe you add some mountains in. Okay. Add some extra bigger mountains back here. This is entirely up to you. So again, the more lines you have, the longer it's going to take and the more complicated it's going to be. So if you want to challenge yourself, add some more lines. If you want it to be a little bit easier, you're going to go with something that's a little bit more straightforward like this. It's still going to look really cool at the end, but it's not going to be quite as challenging. So it's up to you what you want to do. I'm going to go with the spiral. Go with one that's a little bit easier, and then maybe I will include a picture of one that's a little bit more challenging after. So I'm going to start relatively in the middle. And I'm just going to go around. Now I'm using a marker for this because I like the black lines. If you don't want black lines, just use a pencil. They'll be much more faint. You won't see them as much. Okay. There we go. So I've got my spiral. Now the fun part. and the time-consuming part, but this is where your piece really starts to come together. So I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to start with my little triangles. I just like the way it looks with the little triangles in the middle, so you can see that that's what I've done for this one. I've got all the little teeny ones in the middle, and then they get bigger as they go out, and then my biggest ones are on the outside. So I'm going to do a similar sort of thing, and all you're going to do for this is you are going to do a little fold. Actually, I'll show you with a bigger piece because it'll be easier to see. So here's your triangle. All you're going to do is you want to fold a bit of the base. Okay? That's it. You're basically making a stand. And this is the part that's going to get dunked in the glue. You don't need a whole lot of glue, but you want to make sure that you get enough that so that it covers the bottom. Okay? So the smaller your triangles, the trickier this is going to be because you're not going to have as much space to work with. Whoops, see, look, I just dropped one. I'll grab another one. You see, I'm just going to fold that little bottom. Like I said, the smaller the triangle, the more challenging that's going to be. And then all we're going to do is we're going to dunk into the glue. Okay? And you're going to stick it on. So if the curves of your drawing are too sharp, you're going to have a tricky time trying to get the triangles in the right spot. But it's all experimentation, and it's all about just having some fun with this and getting creative and doing something that's a little bit different than you've ever done before. I know I certainly haven't done anything like this, so this was a unique, interesting activity for me to do. And you're just going to follow your lines that you've made. Now, I'm not really going to do kind of any rhyme or reason to my colors. I'm just going to put them on. Whichever ones I grab, I'm going to put them on. But you'll see that on this one, I did sort of do a bit of a pattern. So I did strips of the pinky, and then I went into some blues and then greens, and I sort of alternated what colors I was doing. But I think for this one, I don't have as many colors as I did for this one. So I think I'm just gonna go with whatever I'm feeling in the moment. Whichever triangle I grab, that's the one I'm gonna put down next. But if you wanna come up with a color pattern, you are more than welcome to do that. You all have the cool colors. I got the remnants, so I only had reds and pinks and blues left, but you should all have a rainbow assortment of colors, so you have lots to choose from. And hopefully you used a bunch of them for your background, or maybe you just did what I did and you wanted to go with just blues and pinks, and that's okay too. So we're gonna go through, we're gonna keep doing this, and this is, the cool thing about this project is you can take a break. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. It's not going anywhere. Just keep your stuff, put it all back in the box if you want, and come back to it after. So you can definitely take breaks. I know things like this, sometimes they can get a little frustrating because there's so many little steps you have to do. You have to fold it, and you gotta make sure you stick it right where you want it. And it can get a little tiring after a while, and that's okay. Just walk away, take a break, put it all back in your art box, come back to it the next day. There's nothing saying that you have to finish it all in one go. The most important thing is that you're enjoying it and that you try your best, because art is all about experiences, and you want to experience the most that you can with art. And so I might find that later, after I've put these all on, I might decide that I want to come back and I want to actually add some more in the middle, and that's fine too. You can always come back and add more. But for now, I'm just going to follow the lines, and I'm going to use whatever colors I feel like, and then maybe at the end, I'll want to come back and add some more details, and that's okay. So far, I'm really liking my color pattern. And don't be afraid if they're not, like if they're sticking straight up and down, that's okay. I gave mine a little curl at the end, but before you do that, you want to make sure that your glue is totally dry, or you'll just keep sliding them around your canvas. And that's just frustrating. So once you put them on, just leave them, and you're going to want to leave them until they're totally dry. So I'm gonna keep trucking along on this, and I'm actually gonna fast forward the video a little bit for you. So feel free to pause if you feel like you're getting behind, that's totally fine. But I'm just gonna have it fast forwarded a bit so that you can kind of get to the end and you can see how it looks after. Okay, so here we are at the last few pieces. I'm just going to worry about doing these last few big blue pieces. And then I'm going to decide if I want to add any more anywhere else. I might add a couple small ones again in the middle, but I'm thinking it looks really cool so far. It kind of reminds me of tie-dye a little bit. Okay, so there we go. It's looking really neat. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. So I think the only thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add just a couple more little tiny ones in the middle there. I hope that you've all enjoyed doing this project. It is a little bit challenging and time consuming, but art is all about learning and experiencing new things. So I hope that you learned about a new different art style. Something pretty cool, abstract, and a lot of fun. So I'm really liking the way this turned out. I'm quite pleased with it. So now what you want to do is you're going to let it sit and you're going to let that glue dry totally. So I'm not going to touch it, because as you probably noticed as you went along, when you bumped some of the other triangles, they shifted a little bit because the glue is still wet. So I'm going to just leave it. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to just set it aside and let all of that glue dry. I'm going to use my finished one, my dry one, as an example for the next part, just because it's already done. So once it's all dry, you'll see I can touch them all and nothing's shifting around. That's what you want, because if the glue is wet at all, you won't be able to manipulate any of these triangles. So this is where you can also get a little bit creative. You can lay them all flat or mostly flat if you want. You can have them kind of flat like that, or you can curl them all. And hopefully you used enough glue. And all I do to curl them is I just sort of wrap them around my finger a little bit. Just wrap around the edges. And if you curl the tips of these, it almost makes it look like a little bit like a sunflower effect, or flower petals. But again, it's entirely up to you. You decide what you want to do. If you just like them exactly as they are, then just leave them. And there you have it. You're awesome. Mixed media, watercolor tissue art. I hope you had a lot of fun doing this. I hope you save your remnants, use them for another activity at some point, and I really hope that you send us some pictures because we want to see what you create. Don't forget to tidy up all your mess. Put your lid on your glue. Don't let it dry out. You can use it again later. And we'll see you next time. Bye!